Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar, Conducting Photo Archive Research Using the Frick Digital Collections. My name is Carrie Pfister. I'm the Associate Photo Archivist here at the Frick Art Reference Library, and today it is my pleasure to introduce my colleagues, our Assistant Photo Archivist, Sarah Bigler, and Photo Archive Lead, John McQuaid, who will be demonstrating how to access the Photo Archive's holdings online through Frick Digital Collections and how to maximize its research potential. At the end of the presentation, there'll be time for questions, so please type any questions into the questions pane on your screen. So let's get started. Let me introduce you to Sarah Bigler.
Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. Thanks, Carrie. So my name is Sarah Bigler, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the Photo Archive's digital resources. So the focus of today's presentation will be how to access the Photo Archive digitally and retrieve information using the library's digital resources. I'll give you a brief introduction to the Photo Archive and its digital holdings, and then the majority of our presentation today will focus on Frick Digital Collections itself. We'll walk through the basic functionalities of the site and present various strategies and best practices for using the tool to conduct Photo Archive research. So before we get started, I wanted to just lay out some overall goals for today's session. By the end of our discussion this afternoon, it's our hope that everyone will be familiar with all of the options for accessing Photo Archive materials digitally, understand the basic functionalities of Frick Digital Collections, feel comfortable using the filters under the Photo Archive page for advanced searches, gain insight into the Photo Archive research capabilities provided by Frick Digital Collections, and then finally be able to download materials through Frick Digital Collections. So with those goals in mind, let's get started. Just a brief refresher on the Photo Archive for any of you who are maybe new to using the collection. The Photo Archive is a collection of photographic reproductions of works of art. The current collection comprises approximately 1.2 million photographic reproductions, representing more than 40,000 artists, mainly from the 4th to the mid-20th century, though our scope is expanding. Originally, photographs were mounted on 9x12 gray cardboard, and additional information was manually typed onto the back. The records on gray cardboard, an example of which you can see here on the screen, are each assigned a unique classification based on subject matter. We refer to these gray mounts as classified mounts, and there are approximately 400,000 in the collection. The remainder of the collection consists of loose photographs with limited documentation, referred to as supply photographs. You can see some examples of those here on the screen. While the Photo Archive existed for 75 years as an analog collection, today it has become a digital resource, and its access has been expanded exponentially. Photo Archive images and documentation are available to researchers globally using Frick Digital Collections. Like the documentation on the back of the mounts, our metadata presents essential elements of the biography of a work of art, including attribution, ownership, and condition history, and thus provides an unparalleled resource for the study of the history of art. At present, images and metadata for more than 300,000 works of art are available on Frick Digital Collections. Catalog records for works of art represented in the Photo Archive are also accessible through the library's online catalog, Fresco, and through NYARK Discovery, the online catalog of the New York Art Resources Consortium. Photo Archive images and metadata can be accessed by going directly to Frick Digital Collections or through Fresco and NYARK Discovery. Individual records in both of these catalogs link directly to Frick Digital Collections, where you can view and download images and metadata. Which platform you use to search and view Photo Archive materials is really up to you. We're going to go through now and show you an example of what the record for the same work of art will look like in all three places, just to highlight some of the distinguishing features between the platforms. So first is Frick Digital Collections. So here you can see an example of a record in Frick Digital Collections. and the metadata available. Just quickly, here's a reminder of the Photoarchive drop-down menu from the Fresco homepage. It's important to choose this if you're searching specifically for Photoarchive materials. So here's an example of a Fresco record. You can see there's much more detailed metadata available here, including provenance and attribution history, as well as source information for the sources used to research the work of art represented in the photograph and the sources of the photographs themselves. As you can also see, there are no images directly in Fresco. So to view images, you'll click on View Images, View Photoarchive Images and Documentation here, and that will link you out to Frick Digital Collections where you can view and download images. Finally, here's an example of a record for the same work of art in NIARC Discovery. Just as in Fresco, you can see there's a lot more metadata here. The metadata on Fresco and NIARC Discovery is identical. You can also see that in NIARC Discovery, there's a thumbnail-sized image here on the right-hand side. If you click on Photoarchive Images and Documentation, again, it will link you directly to Frick Digital Collections where you can view and download. So just one important difference between these three platforms that I wanted to point out to you all today is the search compatibility. Fresco and NIARC Discovery are designed for keyword searching, while Frick Digital Collections allows for keyword searches, but filtered searches are more precise. So which platform you choose to use depends on what type of searches you want to do and which platform you find the most intuitive. But here we've just compiled a list of the key features offered by each platform so you can look at them side by side. So I'll just leave this up for a moment. I know it's a lot of information to take in. So now that we've seen all three ways to access digitized Photoarchive materials, let's narrow the focus in and just speak about Frick Digital Collections. So we'll go over the functionalities of the site to provide you with a concrete understanding of how to use the site to retrieve the materials you're looking for and how to optimize its search functions. We'll touch on pages, filters, searching, selected searches and images, downloading, and then later John will discuss the image comparison tool offered by Frick Digital Collections. After we go through the logistics of the site itself, then we'll go through some sample searches together. So the first step when you arrive on the homepage of Frick Digital Collections is to make sure and choose the Photoarchive page here. You can see there are these 4 tabs which delineate the 3 different collections available on Frick Digital Collections: Photoarchive, Archives, and Books. So it's important to choose the Photoarchive tab if you're looking for Photoarchive materials because there are specific filters and functions that are available within this page that are not available in the others. So next is the filters. So the filters here on the left-hand side of the screen allow us to filter Photoarchive material by national school, artist, or as it's called in Frick Digital Collections, creator, object type, classification, heading, and collection. So these filters allow us to narrow the volume of materials by choosing specific parameters based on exactly what we're looking for. So this makes scrolling through search results much more manageable. So next is searching. In Frick Digital Collections, there are 2 ways to search. As I mentioned briefly a few minutes ago, Frick Digital Collections is not as compatible for keyword searching as Fresco and NIARC Discovery. Just because of the volume of images, keyword searches often produce scattered results, making it more difficult to scroll through to find what you're looking for. So the most efficient way to search on Frick Digital Collections is using these filters that I mentioned on the left-hand side. You can see here that each of the filters has a drop-down menu where you can use a keyword search within this specific index for the field related to the filter here. Next is selected searches and items. To select images while browsing on Frick Digital Collections, you can hit the Add to Selection button here, the plus sign at the top right-hand corner of every image. This will add the image to the Selected Images bar here at the bottom. To make this bar pop up, you just hit the caret here, and then all of the images you've selected will show up here across the bottom of your screen. You can save as many as you want to this at one time, but if you're trying to download, I wouldn't save more than 10 or 15 just to make the downloading process easier. It's also important to note that the selected images are only selected per session. So if you refresh your browser for some reason, or you move forward trying to download an individual image from the page and then you go back, your selected images will not be there. So I recommend downloading frequently just to make sure none of your images are lost. So finally, we'll talk about downloading. It's from the same selected images bar that I just mentioned, where you'll be able to download groups of images and metadata. So to do so, you'll click on the download button. Make sure to allow for pop-ups. And your files will download as a zip drive, so look for something called frick_dc.zip in your downloads folder. So for each image you select, you will download both the image as a JPEG and then the metadata as an HTML file. So you'll have 2 things per every image you choose. So these are just some little hints for download, like making the most of batch downloading. Just make sure, as I said, to have your pop-ups enabled and make sure not to download too many things at one time. So you can also download individual images. As you're scrolling through Frick Digital Collections, you'll see at the top left of every image is an arrow icon. So if you click that, you'll be able to choose the size of JPEG you would like to download, and that will just download normally. You can also download directly from Fresco. So if you click on the Photoarchive Images and Documentation here, you'll just be directed to a different window of digital collections, but you can see it's pretty intuitive. The downloading is clearly marked. And again, you'll just choose what size of JPEG you're interested in. Just to note, with downloading single images, whether through Frick Digital Collections or through Fresco and NIARC Discovery, it's just the images and not the metadata if you download single images. If you would like the metadata to accompany the images, you have to use the batch downloading feature we just discussed. So just keep that in mind. So just a few hints for troubleshooting while you're using Frick Digital Collections. I think I've touched on most of them already, but I just want to make sure you guys are not having any issues with the site. So if you're working on a Mac, it's best to use Safari or Firefox rather than Chrome. Make sure you're on the Photoarchive page, as I mentioned, because certain filters will only appear there. So if you're searching and you don't see the classification heading filter, for example, it's possibly because you're not in the Photoarchive page. So that's something to always double check. Enable pop-ups, as I said, which is important for downloading and also for using the image comparison tool. And then again, for using the image comparison tool, which John will talk about later, it's important to frequently clear your cache and your cookies just to make sure that that works as well as possible. So now that you have a grasp on the structure and functions of the site, we'll start going through some examples together. These demos will illustrate the types of searches facilitated by Frick Digital Collections, as well as the types of research opportunities provided by Photoarchive materials. So one of the most effective ways to search Frick Digital Collections is by Frick classification heading. As I mentioned this among the filters earlier, but now we'll delve a little deeper into this unique system and see how it can help us to organize our searches on Frick Digital Collections. The analog photo archive is organized by national school and filed by the artist's name in accordance with an in-house classification system based on subject matter. This system of over 500 classification headings was developed with the understanding that art historians often focus on iconography and that art market professionals are often presented with unidentified consignments. there is also the consideration that the subject of a work of art remains consistent, while the collections can change. The library's classification system allows researchers to narrow their search, targeting specific themes rather than rooting through hundreds of images associated with one particular artist. So each classified mount in the photo archive has a unique call number. So you can see the example on the screen. The bold type up here is the call number. So you can see that from the call number, we know that the painting is an American painting, that it's a landscape with water, and that it has a windmill or a watermill. So I tried to parse out the code here. If you're interested in more about our classification headings, in the handout section, we've attached a full list so you can take a look at those so you can have it at your disposal when you're searching this way on Frick Digital Collections. So now we're going to jump out to Frick Digital Collections, and I'll show you how to use this filter to search the photo archive. So just bear with me 1 second as we switch gears. Okay, that seems to have. Okay, so here we are on Frick Digital Collections. We'll go ahead and choose the photo archive page here at the top. So first, and then we'll go and choose the Frick subject classification filter here on the left-hand side. So first, I'm just going to show you how to find the landscape with the windmill that we were just looking for. So we'll be looking for landscapes with water, with windmills or watermills. So some of the classifications will automatically pop up here. So you can see landscapes is here. So we'll just select that, and then it automatically populates some options. So with water, and then I don't see windmills or watermills. So we'll go ahead and type that in. So you see we come up with 442 results, which show us all of the images digitized on and available on Frick Digital Collections that are under this classification. So here you can see this is the painting we were just looking at. So now is a good opportunity just to pause and take a look again at what the records look like in Frick Digital Collections. So you can see we have the cropped image and then the full captures of both the front and the back of the mount. If you want to view the metadata, you click here on Show Metadata. But as I said, there are limited metadata fields in Frick Digital Collections. So to view all of the metadata, you would click See Catalog Record here, and that will pop you out to NIARC Discovery, or where you'll see all of the data, all of the metadata. So next, we'll again search by classification heading. This time we're going to look for things under the classification historical. But this time we're going to go ahead and add in a couple additional filters just to make our search as precise as possible. So this time the painting we're interested in locating the reproduction of is Gros Napoleonette Hulot. So we'll here in Frick subject classification type in historical. And then because we know the artist, we can go ahead and limit it to National School. And we can, in the creator field, type Gros. And then you see the first one that comes up is actually the painting that we are interested in. So here's the full painting. And you can see this mount is also accompanied by some detail images. So we can use this to zoom in and get a closer look at some of the small details of large paintings. So one last search I wanted to do using the classification heading filter is when we're looking for portraits. So this time we're going to look for a 17th century American portrait of David Schuyler. So to clear all of these filters, we can just double click on them. And then we'll close all of the filters we're not using. So then we can type here portraits. Then without hands, without hats, head to the left. And then because we know the sitter of the portrait we're looking for, we can use this subject names filter here and type, if we start typing in Schuyler, here it comes up, Schuyler Davids. And then you can see here there's just one result. So again, we have the front and the back of the mount. You can see here on the back of the mount, there's a lot of historical information about the sitter and his family. As part of the Photoarchive trips between 1922 and 1967 to photograph rare works of art in private collections and small public collections, Photoarchive staff often consulted resources such as family Bibles for historical information about portrait sitters. This genealogical information, included on the back of early American portrait mounts, offers another instance of unpublished information held in the Photoarchive. This information can be enormously helpful both for art historical research as well as genealogical research. So if you're interested in learning more about how to use the Photoarchive for genealogical research, one of our colleagues will be doing a whole webinar devoted to that topic, so stay tuned and check on the library calendar for more information about that. So we're going to pop back to the PowerPoint just for 1 second. So the next series of examples we're going to go through have to do with searching based on collections information. So Frick Digital Collections allows you to search by collection, which includes public collections and institutions, as well as churches and private collections. So we're going to go through an example of each of those to see how we can find that information on Frick Digital Collections. The painting you see here on the screen is one of the examples we'll be looking for when we search based on private collection. Oops, so we go back to digital collections here, and we'll again unselect all of the filters we're not using. And then we'll choose the collections filter. So first we'll start with a simple public collection search and just go from there. So say we're interested in works from the Newport Historical Society. So you can see here, if we type it in, it pops right up and we get 45 results. If we had typed Newport like this into the keyword search filter here, we would have gotten many more results because it would bring up every instance of Newport in any of the metadata fields, whereas this will just search for this one field. So you can see we can scroll through all the portraits. So next, we'll go ahead and clear this, and we'll look for works of art that are still in situ. If we're interested in tracking down images of frescoes in the Church of San Francesco al Prato in Parma, we can do that here using the same filter. So if we go ahead and start typing it in, here it pops up again, and you can see there's 54 results. And then here we can see images of all of the frescoes by many different artists in this church. So it allows us to get an understanding of the interactions between the works of art that are located in the same space. So now we're going to go ahead and search based on private collection. This time we're going to look for the painting I showed on the PowerPoint a moment ago, which is from the collection of Mr. and Mrs. Peter Tilo, who have an incredible collection of 19th century American paintings and decorative arts. Some of the collection has been auctioned off, but the Tilo collection should still be the last known location for most of the paintings in our records. So we'll go ahead and again, here we'll type their last name, and here are all of our results. And then if we do a little scroll, we can see all the works of art in their collection. And then here's that painting I showed you on the PowerPoint a moment ago. So one other great way to use Frick Digital Collections is to search for works of art that have not been digitized by their home institutions. So a great example of this is the Musée Carnavalet in Paris, who have digitized some of their collection, but the Photoarchive has a lot available as well. So if what you can't find exactly what you're looking for on their website, you can come to Frick Digital Collections. So here you can see if we, under collections, it's already actually popped up. So we can just hit Musée Carnavalet, and then you can see we have over 1,100 results. But if we know exactly what type of paintings we're looking for example, like history paintings or images of French Revolutionary festivals, for example, we can go in again and hit the Frick subject classification heading filter and add historical. So then you can see we've cut down our results from over 1,100 to 130, which is just a much more manageable number of images to scroll through. So one final way to use the collections filter or to search for collections information on Frick Digital Collections, is to track down works formerly in historical collections. So for these, we actually can't use the collections filter because the works of art are no longer in those collections. So instead, we'll use the regular keyword search here, and then we'll add in some additional filters to help us find exactly what we're searching for. So this time, we're hoping to find the current location of Van Dyck's Portrait of a Man, which was once in the famous collection of Sir Francis Cook. So we can find all of this information using the Photoarchive's digital resources. So this time we're going to type Cook, the name of the collection, here into the regular keyword search. And you can see we get 440 items. But because we know that this is a painting by Anthony Van Dyck, we can go ahead and type Van Dyck into the creator field. And then you see we only get 5. So, and then the painting here on the far right is the one we're looking for. So if we hit show metadata, we can see now this painting is in the collection of a museum in Hamburg. But if we want to get a look at the full provenance, we can click See Catalog Record here. And we can see here in the provenance field that it was bought by Sir Francis Cook in 1875 and then passed down through his family and has been sold and eventually ended up where it is now in the Kunsthalle Hamburg. So I hope that these examples have offered some helpful suggestions and strategies for searching Frick Digital Collections by subject classification. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass things off to my colleague, John McQuaid, the Photoarchive lead, who will walk you through a few more examples and then touch on what's to come from Frick Digital Collections and talk about a few more of digital Photoarchive projects. So I'm going to hand things off to John.
Hello, thank you everybody for coming and attending this afternoon. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Carrie. I also would like to point out that, as Carrie did at the beginning, that we do have a questions feature on the menu bar for GoToWebinar. So if you have any questions, please type them in there, and we can answer them if there's time at the end. Sarah brought into searching for collections through Frick Digital Collections. And since Frick Digital Collections was implemented in 2016, we've been constantly updating and improving both the functionality of the site and as well as the information presented. We use Frick Digital Collections in our own research, especially now as the building is closed and now that the majority of the photo archive is off-site. One of the most asked about and utilized portions of the photo archive is our vast amount of provenance research. And as Sarah showed you before, there are ways to use Frick Digital Collections in order to get provenance. But right now, at the current state, it is a little bit easier to use one of the earlier, to use the library catalog, which was mentioned earlier in the presentation. In this case, I chose one example, the Paul Gauguin Upava Schnecklut, because it's a good example of a photo archive record with a provenance history that is not too short, not too long, and it shows some of the ways that one can search within the library catalog. We're looking at here the discovery page for the work of art, and just to zoom in so it's a little bit easier to see, I brought in the provenance zoomed in a little bit. Here we can see that there are 7 instances of provenance before the current repository of the Baltimore Museum of Art, where it went in 1979, and that's beginning with the 1914 sale in Paris. The provenance research is a culmination of the 100 years of the photo archive, and we want to make sure that it's available to people right now, even as we're improving Frick Digital Collections. As you can see on the back of these analog mounts for the work of art, the original mount is on the left, and it only has 3 examples of the provenance: the 1914 sale, the Jacob Blaustein, and then and a private collection before that. But as Photoarchive staff were researched the work of art and were alerted to changes in the provenance of the painting, the provenance was updated and filled out to show that the more full provenance, which you can see on the right, including all 3 sales, named in the private collection from the earlier amount, and also the 1979 gift to the Baltimore Museum of Art. As Sarah showed you, you would have been able to see that in the Frick Digital Collections, but we might have had to know that it was in the Baltimore Museum of Art now, or knowing the artist was Paul Gauguin, which seems obvious, but when you're looking for something specific or something not well known, that often isn't the case. And what a keyword search in either Fresco, the library catalog, or Narrator Sagri will present you is not only the work of art itself, but also any other instance of the former holder. So in this case, I searched for Jacob Blaustein, which you can see in the upper left. And the second result is the Gauguin painting that we were looking at before, but it also has a self-portrait by Benjamin West that is also in the Baltimore Museum of Art, as well as a portrait of a girl by an anonymous American artist. And this work of art, we don't know where it is now. We only have the last known repository as Mr. and Mrs. Jacob Blaustein. So if you were to look up Blaustein in Frick Digital Collections, this would be the only occurrence, whereas looking it up as a keyword search in the library catalog or NIARC Discovery will present you with all the instances in the provenance. And there actually were six results. I'm just showing you the top 3. But being in the photo archive, we are in the image availability business. And one of the things that we are most proud of on Frick Digital Collections is our image comparison tool, which allows the viewer to look at a reproduction of a work of art, to dive deep into the details of that reproduction, and to compare it with 1, 2, or up to 24 other images in order to facilitate art historical research. One note about the image comparison tool is that it operates within the framework of the International Image Interoperability Framework, or IIIF, which is a framework that is a discovery platform. So the works of art are stored on the Frick site in whatever format we want, but then they're presented through our tool according to IIIF guidelines. And one of the benefits of IIIF is that the works of art are stable, so that if you use a work of art that is shown through IIIF, then it won't sometimes in a different viewer, or if you move it from one PowerPoint to a different program, the image becomes corrupted. The IIIF image is stable, so it will work across platforms. And also the stability of the IIIF allows you to go back to the image or back to a search in order to not lose what you had done on a previous day or in a previous session. And if you're very interested in how IIIF works and their goals, their website is IIIF.io. And if you're really interested in the technical aspects and the coding behind it, that's also available on their GitHub site, also listed. So to showcase the image comparison tool, I chose one example, El Greco's Count Organots. So searching for that in Frick Digital Collections and not forgetting to choose the photo archive. You can see that because it's a relatively well-known work of art, it is the first image selected. When clicking on the image, the first page that it takes you to is this preview page, where it shows you the the work of art in total in the main screen in the center, and as Sarah mentioned, all of the available details to the left. And Sarah briefly mentioned this, but one of the best aspects of the viewer is the deep zoom technology that allows you to look at the work of art and get close into details, the stole of the bishop, and even, as we'll see later, some of the brush strokes of El Greco as when you zoom in. But in this preview window, though, the only additional, in addition to looking at the image, the only extra functionality is this deep zoom. To really take advantage of the viewer, it's recommended you open the viewer in the upper left here. And that will present you with a default of the first image that was selected, seen on the left, and then the first detail from that list on the right. And that will always be the default that shows up, are the first two selected images. To showcase some of the functionality of the viewer, I'll close the comparison window and just focus on the overall work of art for now. In order to get rid of any of the additional images at the bottom, you can toggle the window to go to full screen, and that'll be less distracting and also have all the functionality that I'm about to show you. Those of you who do art historical research, you're probably very familiar with image manipulation tools, and most of the basic ones are available through our image viewer. Rotating the work of art, brightness, contrast, which is very useful in an El Greco or any image where you're interested in looking at the brush strokes, and also going into that zoom function. You can see that how in depth that one can get by just going in very simply with the scroll on the mouse, or using the plus and minus at the bottom. The grayscale can be adjusted, and it also can flip the colors for an X-ray effect, which is useful also. And as you move around and manipulate the image, it's possible to get lost and not realize exactly what you're looking at. The last choice, reset the image, will always bring you back to the beginning, and home at the bottom right will resize it. So you can always go back to what you were looking at before in case you get lost in the zoom or in any of the other features. One of the other features of the viewer is the ability to annotate the reproduction. Often in a work of art, it's useful to make notes, and if the notes can be accessible within the image or even on the image, that can be helpful both for presenting the work of art, for teaching with the work of art, or even just notes to yourself as you're conducting your own research. And there are several different ways that can be achieved within the image, within the image viewer. For a larger annotation, one can choose the box, and then it gives you a text box where you can enter whatever you'd like to do. So in this case, if you wanted to make sure you didn't forget about talking about the Virgin Mary, you can enter the text there and save it. One of the other features I find very useful is the pin annotation, which for historical works of art or works of art with a lot of figures like this one, you are able to choose people in the background, pin them, and identify them if you wish. In this case, likely self-portrait of El Greco. And the annotations, the outline of the annotations are visible on the image. And to see what you chose to annotate, simply hover over the annotation, whether the box for the Virgin Mary or the pin to show El Greco. And one of the advancements that IIIF is looking forward to implementing in the very near future is actually having these annotations have the text appear on the image as well. So you will have a choice to keep it in the box and hover over it, or have the words appear on the screen. And IIIF is constantly updating itself in different versions based on user feedback and what and what they hear from other people to make it more functional and better serving the public. We're in full screen mode now. I'll take out the annotations. And we're in full screen mode now. And in order to get back to the preview view, in order to have a bit more functionality for selecting images, one can either choose the close arrows in the upper right or pressing the escape key, which I just did there to go back. So you have two options to get back with, and that will also bring you back to the beginning without losing the selected images at the bottom. The image viewer does not just allow you to look at works of art one at a time or one detail at a time. Also, you're able to compare them. And one of the easiest ways to achieve that is on the upper left, is it presents 4 options for choosing another window to compare works of art, either adding right, left, above, or below, choosing add right, and we can add item, and it takes us to this page where the selected items are available. And if one wants to choose a detail, it appears on the right. And then this also can be, you can add objects to the first image, or you can add objects to the second image, your choice, depending on what comparisons you would like to see. Right now, we're in a view. Right now, we are in a view that's called image view, which is most useful for looking at works of art, especially side-by-side comparisons. But there are other views available in our Frick Digital Collections viewer, in book view, and we're in the photo archive page now. But if you were to go to the book department page, you would be able to look at digitized books, and the book view may be most relevant for you there, and that will let you scroll through 2 pages at a time, just as if you were looking at the actual book itself. For scroll view, does what it's advertised. It presents all of the selected images with the scroll bar at the bottom, and allows you to go through from left to right, or right to left. And in gallery view, this presents you a slightly larger, a little bit more manageable view of all of the selected images that you can then click on. From gallery view, if you select an image, it will take you back to the previous non-gallery view. That makes sense. So we had come into gallery view from scroll view. So clicking on this detail will take us back to scroll view. However, now we are in image view, and going back to gallery view and clicking on an image, that will take us back to image view, which is our previous example. And comparing just one at a time was useful when there were only 2 slide projectors in a lecture hall, but we now have the capability to compare more than one image, as I briefly showed you. But if you wanted to show up to 25 at a time, it doesn't make sense to just add the windows one at a time. By choosing change layout, also in the upper right, you're presented with a grid where you have the option to create your own customized grid of up to 25 images in a 5x5, 9 in a 3x3, and so on. So choosing 6 at a time, and then just adding any at random to fill up the page. And moving to full screen, we can see our 6 images that are showed, 3 at the top and 2 at the bottom. And as Sarah mentioned before, that it's important to download and to save because each of these images are only available by session. One capability of the viewer is to bookmark this page. As I said, the IIIF functionality makes sure the images are stable and can be used across different programs. It also creates a stable URL for this page, or any page after you click on bookmark, that you will be able to reuse in your research, use it across different web browsers. You can email it to a colleague, or just save it in a document so someone can use it as hypertext. It does not go directly to your web browser's bookmarks like a web page, or if you hit Control D. But if you cut and paste, if you copy the text and open a tab, and after loading a bit, because there are 6 images loading, you'll see that your saved images do appear in a completely different view. And the viewer would not be useful if only looking at one work of art at a time. In looking at the El Greco burial of the Count Orgaz, I noticed a work of art that I was not familiar with, a study for another painting by Miguel Jacinto Menendez. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, it is possible to compare works of art to completely different works of art by adding them to the selected images, bringing them back up, and clicking compare. And all of the functionality I previously described is available in the same way, in addition to bookmarking and saving. So I hope that's helpful with one of the tools of Frick Digital Collection that we're most proud of, the Digital Image Viewer. I'll exit the digital collections now and finish briefly with the PowerPoint. Currently, we also have Photoarchive digital projects ongoing, including a mapping project. Sarah mentioned that the Photoarchive sent photographers throughout the United States from 1922 to 1967 to photograph works of art in private collections. And we are currently creating an interactive map that will show down to the city level where these images were taken in the 45 years of the campaigns. We also have a project called Describe It, which is on Zooniverse, and it is a project where volunteers are adding 15 or fewer word descriptions of works of art from the Photoarchive, and then these will be made available for people who use screen viewers to access the internet, so that the descriptions will be able to be read out to them from the screen viewer. And in conjunction with Stanford and Cornell, we're investigating machine learning technology to see how computer technology can look at catalog images from the Frick Photoarchive and apply our Photoarchive classification headings to uncatalogued materials, thus alleviating a step from the photoarchivist having to choose the landscapes with windmills, as we saw earlier. And coming soon on Frick Digital Collections, we will be adding digitized images for both Dutch and Italian supply collections. These are scanned and will be made available on the artist level in the near future. And we're also continuing our digitization, continuing our supply reproductions with the Flemish School, as well as our holdings in sculpture and architecture. We're also enhancing the metadata for the works of art. We are involved in a number of projects with linked open data, and this hopefully will be like a one-stop access point for any information interested to the work of art in order to show similar subject matters, like different instances of the burial of Count Orgaz, or even to the point where the auction catalogs mentioned in the provenance, a digital copy of the auction catalog would be available. And our American Supply images, which are now only searchable by artist will have the metadata and provenance and any other metadata attached to the work of art will be made available. And in the very near future, in the next couple of weeks, we will have the mobile capability for Frick digital collections available for use on tablets and phones. So thank you very much for attending. If you have any questions or would like to schedule a personal session with a photo archivist, please feel free to contact us.
Photoarchive.org. Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much.